Picture a night sky 10,000 years ago. No cities, no light pollution, just you, a fire, and a darkness so complete that the stars feel close enough to touch. Then, a crack of thunder. A bolt of lightning splits an oak tree in half. The earth shakes, the river floods, a child dies for no reason anyone can understand. And here is the question that haunted every human being who ever lived before writing, before science, before philosophy. Why? Not just what caused this, but something deeper, something more desperate. Why does any of this happen to us? Who is responsible? And what do we have to do to make it stop? For most of human history, the answer was the same everywhere you looked. The gods did it. And if you could figure out which god was angry and what they wanted, you could survive. Maybe even thrive. That answer worked for thousands of years. And then, in a small corner of the ancient Mediterranean, a few people started asking a different kind of question. Not who caused the thunder, but what caused it. That shift from who to what, from story to reason, is one of the most consequential things that ever happened to the human mind. And it all began with philosophy. Hey everyone, I'm Luca. And the reason why I make such videos is to uncover unfamiliar histories of familiar things and unpack big ideas that shape our everyday lives. And in today's video, we shall be discussing how philosophy began. Before we can understand what philosophy is, we have to understand what came before it. Imagine you're a Bronze Age farmer. The Nile floods every year and you do not know why. Your crops fail and your child falls sick. And in the middle of the night, your only question is, what have I done to deserve this? The answer every ancient culture gave was mythology. Not because ancient people were stupid, they weren't, but because mythology was enormously functional. It explained things, it gave suffering meaning, it organized society, it told you owed your king, your gods, your neighbors. Homer's epics told the Greeks that Troy fell because of divine jealousy and human pride. The Mesopotamian Enuma Elish explained creation as a war between gods. The Norse myths explained thunder through Thor, while many cultures explain storms, droughts, floods, and changing seasons through the actions of gods and supernatural beings. These weren't just stories, they were operating systems for understanding reality. And then, somewhere around the 6th century BCE, something changed. Not everywhere, not all at once, but in certain harbor cities along the coast of what is now Western Turkey. A group of thinkers began doing something genuinely strange. They started asking whether nature might follow rules instead of moods. What happened when people stopped accepting old answers? The short version, philosophy, happened. But let's be specific, because the details matter here. The first people we will call philosophers weren't sitting in academics debating abstractions. They were more likely what we will call scientists today. They wanted to know what the world was made of, what held it together, why things changed. The city of Miletus on the Aegean coast produced a cluster of thinkers who gave us perhaps the earliest recorded attempt to explain the natural world without invoking the will of gods. Thales, or Thales of Miletus, often called the first philosopher, looked at the world and proposed something almost childlike in its simplicity. Everything is made of water. Now, stop and think about how radical that actually is. Not Poseidon rules the sea and therefore shapes reality, but water is substance, a thing you can touch, measure, observe. Thales was saying that underneath the chaos of the world, there is a single natural substance on which everything emerges. He was almost certainly wrong about the substance, but he was doing something no one had quite done before. He was demanding a natural explanation for a natural world. His student, Anaximander, pushed further, arguing that the fundamental stuff of reality wasn't any particular substance you could name. It was something boundless and indefinite. which he called the Epiron. Anaximenes thought it was air. These theories now seem primitive. The world has a structure that human reason can investigate. Mythological explanations didn't disappear, but they were beginning to share space with a new approach: rational inquiry. Here's where we need to pause and get our bearings. Because philosophy, it turns out, is not one thing. It's more like a city with 5 districts, each one asking a completely different set of questions. The first district is logic, and is the one that gives you the tools to work in all the others. Logic is the study of good reasoning. What makes an argument valid? What makes it invalid? What are the patterns of thinking that led us from truth to truth? And what are the patterns, we call them fallacies, that only feel like reasoning but actually aren't? Here's a quick example of a fallacy you've almost certainly encountered. Suppose two people are arguing about vaccines. Person A claims vaccines causes harm. Person B, instead of explaining the evidence, says, "You only believe that because people like Alex Jones believe it." That's the fallacy of guilt by association. Even bad people sometimes have true beliefs, and even if they didn't, the truth or falsity of a claim has nothing to do with who holds it. The evidence is what matters. Logic is what helps us stay honest about that. The second district is metaphysics, the study of reality itself. Not what the world looks like, but what it fundamentally is. Is there a God? What is the nature of truth? Do abstract things like numbers and categories actually exist? At first, these questions might seem detached from everyday life, but consider this. When you dream, the experience feels real while it's happening. So how do you know you're not dreaming right now? If everything you experience comes through your senses, how can you be absolutely certain that the world is exactly as it appears? Questions like these have occupied philosophers for thousands of years. Metaphysics isn't what is ultimately real, but whether reality is what we think it is. The third district is epistemology, the study of knowledge. How do we know what we know? Can we really be certain of anything? This question, as we will see, consumed some of the greatest minds in history. Imagine you're scrolling through social media and you come across a breaking news story. How do you decide whether it is true? Do you trust the source? Look for evidence? Compare it with other reports? Every day, without realizing it, you're making judgments about knowledge. Epistemology investigates the standard we use to separate truth from error, certainty from doubt, and knowledge from mere belief. The fourth is ethics, the study of how we should live and treat each other. Suppose you could lie to save a friend's life. Should you do it? What if telling the truth would cause harm? Is an action right because of its consequences, because it follows a moral rule, or because it reflects good character? Ethics explores questions like these. It asks not merely what people do, but what they ought to do. And because every human being makes choices, ethics is perhaps one of the most personal branches of philosophy. And the fifth is political philosophy. This is when ethics gets scaled up to the level of societies, governments, and justice. Imagine you were designing a country from scratch, but you had no idea whether you'd be born rich or poor, powerful or powerless, healthy or disabled. What kind of laws would you create? What rights would people have? How much power should governments possess? Political philosophy tackles these questions. It explores how societies should be organized, what justice looks like, and how freedom, equality, and authority can coexist. Ancient Greek thinkers helped establish many of the categories that still organize Western philosophy today, and each one traces back to that same original provocation. What if we demanded reasons instead of stories? The Presocratics got the machine running, but it was three figures in Athens in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE who built the cathedral. The first was Socrates, and Socrates is fascinating because he wrote nothing. Everything we know about him comes through his students, primarily Plato. What we know is this: Socrates wandered Athens asking questions, not rhetorical questions, real ones. What is courage? What is justice? What is knowledge? And when people give answers, he would gently and relentlessly probe them until the answer collapsed under its own contradictions. This was called the Socratic method, and for many Athenians, it was profoundly annoying. So annoying, in fact, that they put him on trial for corrupting the youth, found him guilty, and sentenced him to death. Socrates drank hemlock in 399 BCE and became philosophy's first martyr. His student, Plato, took Socrates' method and built an entire system of thought around it. Plato's dialogues and dramatic conversations, starring Socrates as the main character, explore almost every major philosophical question: the nature of reality, the definition of justice, what we can know, what we should value, and how societies should be organized. One of Plato's most enduring ideas is his theory of forms. Look around you. You see chairs, some wooden, some plastic, some comfortable, some terrible, but they're all somehow chairs. How? Plato's answer was this: there is a perfect, eternal, and unchanging form of chairness existing in a realm beyond the physical world. The chairs you sit in are just imperfect copies of that form. Everything you can see or touch is a shadow of something more real. This might sound mystical, but it raises the genuine philosophical problem that people are still arguing about today. The abstract categories like justice or the number three actually exist somewhere, independent of human minds, or are they just convenient fictions we invented for our own use? Philosophers who believe in Plato-style abstract objects are called realists. Philosophers who deny their existence are called normalists. Then came Aristotle, Plato's most famous student, and in many ways his most important critic. Aristotle agreed that universals, such as these shared categories, were real, but he didn't think they floated in some other realm. He thought they existed in the things themselves. Chairness exists in actual chairs, not in a separate Platonic heaven. More importantly, Aristotle didn't just do philosophy, he organized it. He founded formal logic as a discipline. He classified governments, analyzed drama, systemized biology, and wrote the first major works of ethics as a standalone subject. His Nicomachean Ethics asks not just what is the right thing to do, but what does it mean to live well as a human being? And his answer centers on the development of virtue, of character, and becoming the kind of person who naturally does the right thing. Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum, the first universities of the Western world, became institutions where mathematics, biology, physics, politics, and what we now call philosophy were all studied together under one roof. The love of wisdom had become a civilization. Philosophy didn't just stay in Athens, it expanded, and one of the expansions was logic, into the study of knowledge, into ethics, into politics. Let's take a look at some of the biggest questions here. The first was on truth. What makes something true? Aristotle gave the earliest formal answer. A sentence is true when what it says matches reality. The cat is on the mat. It's true, if in fact the cat is on the mat. This seems obvious, but philosophers have spent centuries arguing about whether truth is really that simple, or whether truth might depend on verification, or usefulness, or coherence with other beliefs, or if truth is even a real property at all. And now the second question was on knowledge. The ancient Greeks identified what we now call the GBT theory, meaning knowledge is justified through belief. We know something when you believe it, actually true, and you have good reasons to believe it. Sounds reasonable, but in 1963, a philosopher named Edmond Gettier wrote a short paper showing that you can have justified true belief and still not have knowledge. Because sometimes the alignment of your justification and the truth is just luck, pure luck. And with that, one of the oldest theories of knowledge was cracked open by 3 pages. The third question is on ethics. 3 major schools emerge and still compete today. Consequentialism says the rightness of an action depends on its consequences, which means if you maximize good outcomes, you minimize harm. Deontology, most famously developed by Immanuel Kant, says morality is about rules derived from reason. Some actions are simply wrong, regardless of consequences. And virtue ethics, Aristotle's approach, says the primary question isn't what should I do, but what kind of person should I become? And if you can genuinely become virtuous, the right actions tend to follow. The last expansion is justice. Two 20th century philosophers, both at Harvard, read the same history and came to opposite conclusions. John Rawls argued that a just society is one you would choose if you didn't know in advance whether you would be born rich or poor, talented or struggling, powerful or marginal, behind what he called a veil of ignorance. While Robert Nozick argued that justice is historical. What matters is whether property was acquired and transferred fairly, not whether the outcome is equal. These two views, and the vast territory between them, still define most political debates today. There is a question we have to answer at the end of the day. Why does any of this matter? Because you could argue reasonably that philosophy doesn't build bridges, it doesn't cure diseases, it doesn't put food on the table. And for most of human history, most people got along without it just fine. But here is what philosophy actually did. Pentheus looked at a thunderstorm and asked, what causes this? Instead of, who causes this? He was making a bet that the world has a structure that human reason can discover. That bet is the foundation of every scientific institution that has ever existed. When Socrates refused to stop asking questions, even when it cost him his life, he was making a different kind of bet. That thinking clearly, even about uncomfortable things, is worth more than comfortable certainty. When Aristotle sat down to work out what justice is, what virtue is, and what knowledge is, he was insisting that these questions have real answers, and that the answers matter. Logic didn't just give us valid arguments, it gave us mathematics, and eventually computer science, and everything that followed. The study of knowledge didn't just produce abstract theories, it gave us the scientific method, the very framework by which we distinguish reliable evidence from wishful thinking. Ethics didn't just give us codes of conduct, it gave human beings a way to hold power accountable to something beyond power itself. Philosophy is what happens when human beings decide that because we've always done it this way is not enough of an answer. It's what happens when people stop accepting stories and start demanding reasons. And that demand, as unreasonable, stubborn, and relentless as it was, turned out to be one of the most transformative forces in the history of civilization. Because here's the thing about questions. Once you start asking them, really asking them, the way the ancient Greeks did, you can't stop. The world starts looking different. Not just the world out there, but the world in here, your assumptions, your certainties, your inherited beliefs, all of it suddenly becomes something to be examined rather than simply lived inside of. That's what philosophy is. Not a subject, not a curriculum, not something that belongs in a university. It's what it looks like when human beings take seriously the possibility that they might be wrong and decide to find out. So, we started with a thunderstorm, with a frightened human being staring at a sky that didn't explain itself. And what happened over thousands of years is that some people decided the sky owed them an explanation. They demanded one, they built tools to find one, and in the process of demanding that explanation, they changed what it means to be human. But if you really want to get into philosophy, more than anything, just start asking questions. The philosophers would be proud. Thanks for watching.